All right. So thank you all for your attention, and we're very excited about our speaker. I will just tell you that he's filling in at the last minute, so we really appreciate his ability to do that and his flexibility and willingness to join us. And Gillis has a nice introduction for them, and I hope the technology works.
So our speaker today, Jonathan Fike, is a native Californian. Did his first degree in biology and then briefly left the state to do graduate work in Colorado. But then returned and has spent 34 years on the faculty at UCSF. Since his retirement, he's become very involved in the Master Gardener program in Contra Costa County, where one of his stated goals is to introduce more science into our approach to gardening. And so I'm looking forward to his talk, which I will clearly dwell on that because he's going to talk to us today about the biology and the beauty of succulents. So welcome and thank you so much for coming.
Well, thank you so much. I hope you can hear me all well now. I replaced Susan Van Dyne, who had some issue. I don't know what it is, but Susan is the one who trained me as a docent at the Ruth Bancroft Garden. And Susan knows far more than I do about succulents and about the history of the garden. I won't even attempt the garden itself. As a docent, basically what that means is I know how much I don't know. And while I may not be able to answer all your questions about succulents, I can tell you what not to do. Because why? I've done it all and I know a lot of you are succulent people. So I'm just going to give you my perception of succulents from a science point of view, from an aesthetic point of view. And for those of you who are succulent experts, I hope maybe there's a picture or a fact that you didn't know. And for those of you who don't know so much about succulents, maybe I'll introduce you to the beauty of these plants. Now, all the pictures that I'm going to show, I took either at the Bancroft Garden or in my own backyard. And all that means they're not Ansel Adams quality, but it means that all these plants can grow here. Now, these are at Bancroft, it's a little warmer than it is right here, but nonetheless, all these plants can grow here. So let's get going on it. I need 3 hands here, but we'll see what we can do. What is a succulent? It's a descriptive term. It's not a botanical term. And it just pertains to modifications of the plant so they can store water. And all that means is, for instance, all cacti are succulents because they have the stems. That's the stem. Of course, the spines are the modified leaves. So the stems are modified to hold water. So all cacti are succulents, but not all succulents are cacti. This is one of those distinctions that's not really important, but you can use it in one of those really insufferable neighborhood parties you get into. And you'd like to get some discussion going. So where do they come from? They come from dry parts of the world. And there's old world and new world varieties. The old world is Africa, Madagascar, up into the Arabian Peninsula, drier Asia. And these are some of the examples of the plants. This is just examples. And if you're not familiar with those plants, hopefully I'll show a picture or two of them so you will be. But the aloes, euphorbias, ice plants, and jays are old world varieties. I didn't really know how many of these plants come from South Africa, which is really amazing. I've been to South Africa twice and didn't know that. I wish I had known this when I went there. I might have looked at the flora a little more seriously. The New World varieties of the Americas, and these are ones you're probably very familiar with, the agave, the cactus. Dudley, you may or may not be familiar with. It's a California native, actually, in the Echeveria. And I will show you examples of these as we go on. So why do we bother growing them? Well, there's a lot of reasons, and of course, yes, they are beautiful, thank you. But we exist in a Mediterranean climate. Now, this past winter, of course, is an aberration. We live in a dry climate. So these are a nice addition to a garden because they don't need a lot of water. But you know, if you're growing a succulent or a California native or any drought-resistant plant, they're not drought-resistant when you plant them. They need some time and then they're dry resistant. But that's one of the appeals to these plants is that they don't need a lot of water once they're established. But I like to, one of the things that I like so much about them is the aesthetic appeal, what they can do for your garden. Whether you have a rock garden, a berm, or pots on your patio, or your deck. So let's go through some of them. These are Echeveria. And Echeveria is a genus, and these guys are all hybrids. And you can see along the way, I'll either have common names or the genus. Sometimes they're genus and species. Sometimes we don't know because they're hybrids. But a lot of people like to know the scientific name. But certainly Echeveria, they're all rosettes. They're rosettes. They're beautiful rosettes that have a lot of texture, a lot of color. They can be big, they can be small, they can be somewhat bizarre. And they're very interesting plants. They probably would do better here, and they probably do better here than they do at my house in Walnut Creek. They like warmth and sun, but they don't like really hot. They don't like really wet or really cold. You buy an Echeveria and they'll say, hardy to 26 degrees. Well, yeah, but if you have cold and wet together, like we had this winter, it can be trouble because you get a lot of water on the leaves and they can rot. And I've lost some this year because of that. These are maybe the more traditional types of Echeveria with the spoon-shaped leaves. This one that I took in my own backyard, so they look really nice in pots. They can be very big. The colors are gorgeous, I think, and the textures of them. This guy is one of my favorites, but it's hard to say because of the there's no size indication of these guys are about this big. They're very, very big. They have inflorescence or a flower stalk that can get 2 feet. They're just gorgeous, but they're very, very finicky. At Bancroft, they grow under shade cloth in the summer and under plastic in the winter, but they're just gorgeous types of things. Echeveria is the name. You don't see them around too much to buy. They have them at Bancroft. I bought 4 of them and I've managed to kill 3 of them. So, but they are a beautiful plant. The aloes are quite common. Everybody knows the aloes. We see them around. Probably the most common one is aloe arborescens. They can be big clumps of beautiful things. They have nice texture, nice leaves. The colors of the inflorescence can range from red to orange to white to gold. They're very nice. This one is another aloe. This was hybridized by Brian Kimball at Bancroft. It's a unique one. It's a combination of 2 different types of aloes, but it's tall, the leaves are stacked, has nice inflorescence. It's a very interesting looking plant. And this is one of my favorites. This is they grow as singles. This is aloe capitata, and they have these great flower patterns. So what you see here, though, and there's of course a lot more than these, just the size, shape, color, and textures of these things, and you can start visualizing what it would be in your berm, in your rock garden, in your pots, whatever it is, and it adds a lot. I don't know what. Oh, that's a Zoom thing.
Someone else has to do it.
It's all black magic, if you ask me. Can we get that off there? Anyway, when I'm giving this talk before, I had questions. Go ahead, if you want to do that. Yeah, X that out. No? Okay. Well, we have to move with this, I guess. There's about 300 varieties of aloes, and about 3 or 4 of them have medicinal qualities. People ask about that because we all know about aloe vera. Aloe vera is used in creams and soaps and lotions and all that. So there's this is an aloe vera. This is an aloe ferox, which is a big aloe. It can get really big. And aloe arborescens is the one I mentioned before. They all have some medicinal qualities. If you break an aloe leaf, you get that gooey stuff. It's called mucilage. It's very important to soil health, for instance. And you could put it on a minor abrasion, but I would be real reluctant about telling anybody just to use this on because they might have some serious abrasion. You don't want to be putting this stuff on it. And go with the stuff that's like the aloe vera. But people do ask about the medicinal qualities, and there are some medicinal qualities to all of these. The agaves. Before I got into gardening much, I had some agaves in my yard, and I was convinced that they jump. Because every time I would get near them, I would get stuck and I would bleed. So I didn't like agaves at all. When I got involved at the Bangkok garden, they have such a variety. I started looking at them differently. This one's a pretty good size. You don't get a size indication. This is a big guy. You've seen the variegated forms that you see in people's yards. They're different than this one, but they're variegated yellow and green, get very big. One of my favorites is this, the blue glow agave. In maximum size, it's maybe 2.5, 3 feet. It's not a monster. And when the sun is shining behind it, you get a glow on the leaves, gold and red. It's very beautiful. It's got nice sharp spines on the end of the leaves, so you got to be careful. But it's not a monster. You could put it in your yard, providing it's a little bit off where you're not going to run into it. This is Queen Victoria agave. It's called the artichoke agave. These are really neat. They're also not very big. They're very slow growing. In habitat, they grow on the side of a cliff. So that means they don't like a lot of water or don't need a lot of water. So if you give them a lot of water, guess what? I've done that. And one thing that I never knew about agaves, which just really changed my view of them, is what they call bud prints. You see these prints here? That's the print of this leaf. So they come out tight and they imprint their spine pattern onto the leaf that's coming out next. And some of the agaves have absolutely gorgeous bud prints. And this one is a particularly nice one. So it's not just this big leafy thing with sharp spines on it, but it's got texture and color and shapes. And it's really beautiful. Next time you look at an agave, they're not all that pretty. Like this one doesn't have much in the way of bud prints or this one. But you look at some of these and they're just gorgeous. And it changes the whole perception, at least from my point of view, of these plants. And the only issue with agaves, of course, even the small, you need to give them room. There are some small ones that you can get that maybe a football size, or I mean a basketball size. But most of them are pretty good size, so you need to have some room for them. Cacti. We all know about the cacti, and they can range from just a couple inches tall, a few inches tall, like this guy, to hundreds of pounds of weight, like these guys. These are the classic golden barrel, and other ones that just have different colors and sizes. This is a Hematocanthus, is the species name, which relates to the redness of its spines. But here's something that maybe you didn't know, maybe you did, is that in habitat, when you see the barrels, you rarely see a barrel sitting straight up. They always sit at a slight angle. You see all these guys are at a slight angle. Why is that? Because water can pool right here, because they do get rained upon. And that is the most sensitive area of the cactus for rot. So these grow at a slight angle, so when it does get wet, the water runs down the roots to the shallow root system. So that's kind of an adaptation. I'm going to talk about adaptations in a minute. But I think that's kind of an interesting perception when you look. So when I plant a barrel, when I have lots, little guys, not big guys like that, I always put them at a slight angle because we do get rain, and like this year, for instance. This is just more to show the difference in texture, size, different spines. This is a small version of the big barrel I just showed you. And then this guy is it's called Mammillaria. There's a lot of cacti in the genus Mammillaria, and they're really interesting. And they don't have big flowers like these guys. Usually the cacti have flowers up the top. The Mammillaria have around the whole surface of the cacti. These are little, if you touch these little balls, they're about the size of a dime, and they fall off. And they reseed, but they're an interesting texture that you can put if you have a rock garden, and they're pretty resilient. Then there's some miscellaneous type of succulents, which I think is really interesting. This is called a puya, and a puya is native to the Andes in South America. And This inflorescence is a couple feet tall, and I've never seen a flower color like that, turquoise flower. Huyas can range from just a plain purplish color to almost black to this one. And this is a gorgeous plant, but it's a rough one to be around. They have long leaves, and the leaves are like shark teeth. They're very, very rough to be around. So once again, if you have a huya, you put it out of the way. But it takes a few years for it to mature, but they can give you some absolutely stunning inflorescence that you like. The mangavis, I show you this mainly to look down at the shape of the rosette pattern that it has. It's very pretty. Mangavis are a hybrid from an agave and a plant called a manfreda. The agave gives it the leaves and the spines and the shape of the leaves, and the manfreda gives it the colors, the greens and purples. They're spotted, they're striped, they're very beautiful. They can be small. They can be one of just this big up to pretty good size guys. And they're a very pretty plant, and there's lots of varieties, and they're really nice to have in the garden. They're not quite as nasty as an agave. They have a sharp tip maybe on the end, but they're not like some of the others. This one, because it's interesting, it's called Bushman's hat hoodea. And it's not a cactus. It's actually from the Kalahari Desert in Africa, old world plant. They say it's a cactus-like plant. And it's got a really bizarre brown flower. This is the grape mark. It smells like rotting flesh. It's so flies pollinate, carry it from one to the other. But here's the thing about hoodea. The Bushmen or bush people from the Kalahari Desert used to use, they would take part of the stems and it would be suppress their appetite for long treks across the desert. So what happens when modern man gets involved in this? Aha, we have an appetite suppressant, a weight loss compound. So what has happened then? There's almost none of these left in habitat. And there's actually been a clinical trial that was done with the extract from the hoodea versus a placebo, no difference. So it's unfortunate though, because, and it's true of a lot of really neat succulents that they've been taken out of habitat because of collectors. So, but that's kind of an interesting one. And this, many of you know the kangaroo's paw. That's a very common one. They can be reddish brown or reddish brown color. This one's a really neat one. I've never seen this one. I'd love to buy it because of the red and the green teeth-like thing. My whole point of all of this is just the variability in size and shape and color and size that you can use to augment your garden. Let's talk about adaptation. Now I'm getting into my science geek thing. What have these plants done to be able to survive over time, evolve over time to survive the harsh climates that they live in? Now, the agaves, some of these have very tough, have you ever touched an agave? They're like leather, they're very tough. They're light colored. Sometimes they have a powder on it to reflect sunlight. This is the classic century plant, agave americana. It's not a real pretty one like this. Some of the other, this one's got some nice bud prints. But look at how the leaves grow on these. You don't see a leaf flat out. You see them upright. Why is that? Because it reduces the surface area for the sun. It reduces evaporation because all plants transpire, give off water. That's part of their physiology. But these guys don't, they live in a place where there's not a lot of water, so you don't want to lose much. So that's an adaptation that these particular guys have. The spines of cactus, I ask you, what are spines good for? Well, they keep away the herbivores, and they keep away the nosy neighbors. But what they do more than that, they shade the plant. They shade the plant to reduce the evaporation from the surface. They also deflect the wind. If you think about wind, hot wind going over a surface and evaporate more rapidly, so they deflect the wind. Now, there was an interesting anecdote. I did it in my final, when you do a docent thing before COVID was the last time they did tours. So we had to give a tour in our final exam. And I did one on adaptation. And the anecdote about Ruth Bancroft worked in her garden until she was 96 years old. She never wore gloves, ever. Now think of dealing with these problems. She said, and I don't know the exact quote, but there is no cactus too big or too mean to be in a garden. I might take issue with that. And I do that because when I was an undergraduate and I was studying entomology, which is bugs, we would go out in the desert in Southern California, and you put a white sheet over a plant at night, and you shine a blue light or a black light on it, and the insects come to that, makes a blue glow, and the insects come and you collect them. As young men do, when you're out in the desert at night, you drink some beer. I had my share of beer, and I inadvertently sat. And it's a wonder I can sit to this day. The point is, I think I would argue with Ruth about that might be too nasty. This is called a choya, and it actually at the Bancroft is way far away from the paths because it is extremely rough to be around. And as you can see, there's an agave behind it and a yucca and other stuff. So it's way in the back. But that was a little thing that unfortunately I never had a chance to talk to Ruth Bancroft. So water channeling is an adaptation. I already talked about how the big cactus, how they're kind of at an angle. Water runs down these flutes. These flutes also, they expand and contract like an accordion. So when there is water, they get big, and when it starts drying out, they can go and they don't split or have any problem. The agaves have, and the mangaves, think about when water hits that, it's all channeled down to a very shallow root system that these plants have. So that's an adaptation that they have to survive. Color, they reflect sun and heat. For these are mammillaria. This guy's called the old man of the Andes. It grows at very high altitudes. And if you know about high altitudes, you get more ultraviolet light at high altitudes. Ultraviolet light is why you have spots on your face like me, and skin that's fragile and other things. Well, the cacti also can be adversely affected by ultraviolet light. So these cacti have developed hair. This is horse hair. It's like horse hair. They have spines on them. You can touch the hair. It doesn't hurt, but the spines do. But the hair shields the body of the cactus from the ultraviolet light. And it also channels water down to the shallow root system. So those are adaptations. This is one of my favorites. This is called Glotophyllum longum, which means long tongue. And the leaves of this are kind of like a jade plant, that soft, pliable feel. They have nice white flower, yellow flowers, and when the flowers are pollinated, they form seed pods. Seed pods are right here. Here's a close-up of the seed pods. And the seed pods of this one can be there for years. They don't fall off in that year, they stay there for years. But what's really neat about it, when it rains on these plants, those seed pods open into beautiful, almost flower-like things, structures, and inside there are little seeds, and the water hits them and knocks the seed out. And the seed that reproduces that way. Now, what's really neat about this, and what we used to do when we did tours, and we can still do it, but it's harder because they don't do tours anymore, is children in particular, you would show them this and tell them this story, and you would take a bottle of water and pour it on the seeds, and then take the children somewhere else, come back 15 or 20 minutes, and they would be open like this. It's a neat story. That's how I got this picture, by just pouring water on the seed pod. But that's a neat adaptation to help that plant survive. Then there's adaptations from the euphorbias. Euphorbias are an interesting a genus of almost as big, if not bigger than cacti. There's lots of euphorbias. They're old world plants. Poinsettia is a euphorbia. Some of the weeds in your garden are euphorbia. And if you cut them, they will bleed this. It's called latex. This, by the way, is a really neat one. It's called a Medusa head euphorbia. But this is called latex, and latex is everywhere from mildly irritating to terribly toxic. And so you've got to be careful with euphorbias. Most of them are not terribly abrasive to you. I had one, I can't remember the type, but my wife and I were cutting it down, and she was a little more vigorous than me and got a drop of this in her eye. And we spent hours in the emergency room, and I came home and I Googled that particular one, which I can't remember. And it said people have lost their sight, so it can be very, very caustic. So if you have euphorbias, and I would recommend them, they're beautiful plants, but if you handle them, you gotta make sure you wear gloves, if you cut them, you don't get the white stuff on there. When I was in Africa, in Tanzania a couple of years ago, they have euphorbias almost as tall as half this room, huge euphorbias, they're tree-like things. And the only thing that eats them is rhinoceros. So most of the time though, these toxic latex minimizes their herbivory. Nothing eats them because this stuff is pretty rough. My little last science thing is photosynthesis. I think everybody knows what photosynthesis is. It's absolutely, I'm not overstating by saying if you don't have photosynthesis, we don't exist. So you get carbon dioxide from our exhales, plus water from the roots, plus sunlight, and black magic occurs, you get sugar and oxygen. That's photosynthesis. Well, cacti have to do that too. And that's how they make their own food. Many of these things, like this one, sorry, I missed my, like this one, usually soil is right about to this level. How does it do photosynthesis? Because it needs to do that to survive. Because this is an opaque window right here. And the sunlight goes through that window, down inside the plant under the ground where photosynthesis occurs. What a neat adaptation. These are the same. You've got these opaque windows here. Sometimes plants like this will be buried in sand with just a little bit of them exposed. But that way, they don't get exposed to the harsh dryness and they can survive, but yet they have to do the photosynthesis. So let's talk about reproduction, which is kind of goes along with the aesthetics of these plants. These are the inflorescent. And there are two ways that succulents reproduce, probably three, but nonetheless, there's a sexual one, which is through seeds, pollinated by bees or hummingbirds or bats or whatever it is. The asexual one, which is called pups. You get little pups growing along the side. There's another thing about it, is sometimes plants are considered monocarpic or polycarpic. They bloom once or they bloom many times. The agaves bloom only one time in their life. This is a busy photo, so I'll go through it. This is a big agave, and this is the inflorescence, the flower stalk that's going up. It'll go up another 6 or 8 feet and then open into a candelabra type thing. There's one in the back, which is kind of hard to see right here. It's another flower stalk. It's a little agave here, but here's one that flowered last year and is completely dead. Agave only flowers one time in its life, and the entire plant dies. Now, if they have pups, down the pups will take over. The mother plant will die. But this one, for instance, I can't remember the genus species of this particular one, does not have pups. When it dies, it's gone. So you have to reproduce it from seed or some other way. The other plants are called polycarpic, like the aloes. They bloom every year, which makes them very appealing. Now, agaves don't bloom. I mean, you have an agave, it may be years before it blooms. But when it blooms, it goes. But the agaves, once they're established, this is called tangerine. It's a combination of arborescens and allopharax, if you care. But it's a beautiful flower, and they bloom every single year. So that's one of the appeals of the aloes. But obviously, the inflorescence is what one of the reasons we like succulents. These are ice plants. This is cactus. Cactus is beautiful. Their flowers are gorgeous, but they only last one day, maybe two. And this is one I just like to call tiger jaws. And you can kind of see the shape of the jaw here, and they're really pretty yellow flower. So I'm just showing you pictures of inflorescence. Once again, the cacti sometimes are just stunningly vivid. But the cactus is beautiful by itself before it blooms. That just makes it better. This is called a semper vivo. It's a hen and chick. You've heard hen and chicks. That's what hen and chicks, and they bloom in really nice and fluorescent. So all of these provide you flowers every year once they're mature. These are just more, just more to give you the different quality and quantity. And this is from my backyard, and these are from Bangkok. These are aloes, which are very gorgeous. Now, once those flowers go away, then you get the seed pods, and they're pretty in their own right. Remember, I talked about Phylloxera, that's the one with the opens with the water. Some of the cacti, like this one, have the fruit on it, on the top. These, I think this fruit has been on that cactus for a year or two, and they're like little pineapples. But it gives you just another perspective, another type of look in your garden. And this is a prickly pear. And there's one back here with prickly pears are interesting. They have a lot of fruit on them like this. But if you've ever seen the fruit of a prickly pear, see these little bumps here? This is not a really good example. They have little bumps on them. Those little bumps have little brown things called glochids. And if you touch one, the glochid will happily insert itself in your skin. They are tiny, tiny little things. And it's one of those things you know is driving you crazy. It's there, you can't hardly see it, and it's hard to get out. Every year at Bancroft, they have prickly pears, big ones, that put out beautiful red fruit, falls to the ground, children pick it up. We have signs all over, don't pick it up, and they do. And they end up crying, and it's hard to get out. Duct tape, Elmer's glue, but blockage is something you gotta be careful. Blockage, I suppose, would be an adaptation because nothing's going to eat them. But actually, if you peel the skin off, they're very nice and edible. And every year, at least before COVID, they used to have a tasting of cactus fruit at Bancroft every time. I think they're going to go back to that. I've never done it. But pups, these are other reproductive things. I mentioned seeds, of course. And you see this here. This is a classic we have in the garden. It's a palm tree with cactus coming out. How does that happen? You ask, it's really funny because you ask adults, you ask children, and they'll go, bird poop. And that's exactly right. The parents of these cactus are over on the other side of the garden, and the birds get on there, they poop, and that's how this came out. These are pups. And this one, I don't know, this shows a whole spectrum of changes in certain types of agaves. These are agaves. And you see there are little guys over here, those are pups. This is the inflorescence coming up. That's going to open up into a flower. And this is one that flowered last year. And what happens is the flowers germinate on the end of the flower stump. They're called bulbils. It usually happens in stress of the plant. And then the bulbils, these are all little tiny plants. They fall off and start again. So that's just different ways that these plants can reproduce. So how do you grow them? Well, as master gardeners, we often give this slide. It doesn't matter if you're growing tomatoes or succulents or peach trees. These are the things you have to consider when the soil, the water, the sun, and the aeration of the soil. So from that perspective, and another thing that master gardener, my colleagues here that are master gardeners, we cannot recommend these specific. I can't recommend go buy this succulent mix. It has to be vetted by UC. So UC had this succulent potting mix, which we can show. But the point is, it doesn't matter if you do it this way. What matters in a succulent mix is if you have good drainage. You have sand, you have pumice. That's what you need. And the size of peat moss is controversial now because we're depleting the peat moss bogs, but you need some organics. So, but any of the succulent mixes that you can buy at Bancroft Garden, probably at the botanical garden up the hill, at any of the stores, that's going to be okay as long as it has good drainage. Yes. Coconut core. Yeah, coconut core. I don't know how much if you want coconut core in a cactus mix. I don't know the answer to that because coconut core holds water. And while I'm sorry?
It holds more air than heat loss. That's why we're using the word here.
Yeah, okay, but I don't know how, it holds the water. And if you, well, I just have never used it, but I don't know, but
Yeah,
it's,
the plan is that it's get airy.
yeah. So you just want to have air because plants need air. People don't think of that. Plants respire the same as we do. They don't have lungs, but they respire, so they need air and they need water. But they don't want to be sitting in damp stuff. Oops, I meant to do that. Usually that works. So water, that's the second issue. The biggest danger to succulents is you and I with the watering. And that's true. And what you do is you have to fight the urge. I have to fight the urge. I can sit here and talk all day long, but I go to mine and I look and I go, speed water. Look, it's so dry. So what you have is you have the best moisture meters there are. Well, let the plants dry out, but you have the best moisture meter there is in your hand. Now, if you have little pots, you can't get your finger in there, but you can get a toothpick in there. You can get a chopstick in there. You stick it in there, you pull it out. If anything's stuck to it, you don't need water. It's completely dry, you probably can. And if you have bigger pots, get your hand down there and feel it. You know what it feels dry or something. But the fact is that underwatering is best, and that's the hardest thing for us to do. I've been in they have a greenhouse at Bancroft where they have plants that they're hybridizing and stuff. You walk in there, you go, how can these plants survive? They're in these pots, it's so dry, and they do just fine. So you have to minimize the amount of water. So the problem is, I can't tell you how much or how little to grow a plant, or I mean to water a succulent. Why? Because ambient temperature is important. The temperature here is quite different than my house in Walnut Creek. So the watering considerations are different. The location in the garden, is it in partial shade? Is it in a lot of shade? Is it in full sun? That dictates how much water you're going to do. Is it on a slope? At the top of the slope is quite different than the bottom of the slope. So you can't just say water this much because it varies. Is it in the container or the ground? Container is going to dry out faster than the ground is. All these things is just because it's hard to say, all you have to do is give this much water once a week. You can't say that because it's so variable. And another consideration that most of us don't think about is dormancy. There are plants, succulents, that are dormant in the summer. And there are some that are dormant in the winter. You don't want to give them much water in their dormant time. They don't want water, they want to rest. So what are some of the summer dormant plants? The aeoniums, those big, huge plate-like things. They come from the Canary Islands, long stems. They're beautiful things. Right now, they're beautiful. But in the summer, a little while later, they start looking a little ratty, but they're dormant. They've shut down. Aloes. There are some aloes that bloom in the summer, but over in a general sense, aloes are dormant in the summer. They're blooming right now. They're ending. Their blooming period right now is ending. Some are just gorgeous, but they're going to start shutting down. Dudleya. Dudleya is a really neat plant. It is actually native to California and to Baja, Mexico, and it's all along the coast. Right now, they look like this. They really are beautiful. They have big inflorescence, and they're really not. In the summer, they look like somebody put a torch to them. They look terrible. But that's because they're dormant. And sedum. I'm not familiar with sedum too much. I don't grow them, but they are summer dormant along with the gasteria. I just put that on because it's interesting. Gasteria is called gasteria because the flowers look like little stomachs, hence gaster. So these are summer dormant, and there's more than that. Now the winter dormant guys are the agaves. They are just now coming out of dormancy. The agaves, they're going to start growing now. The euphorbias, all the old world plants that have the toxic latex. Echeverias, the beautiful ones with the rosette pattern. Titanosis, I just mentioned it because it's a pretty little plant. And I really like this, if you have a rock garden or something, to put this on there because it almost looks like rocks, the texture of the cactus. And then all of a sudden out comes these beautiful yellow flowers. And cacti are winter dormant and second leaf and heads and shakes. So my whole point of this is Dormancy is when they want to rest, not when they want to grow. Now, does that mean if you water them in their dormant period, they will die? No, it doesn't mean that, but they could. I talked to Brian Kimball, which is the curator of Bancroft. There are succulents, I can't tell you the name, they're not real common. If you water them in the dormant period, they will die. And at Bancroft, they have summer and winter dormant together. They do okay. But you need to be mindful of that. And if you're starting from scratch, what I would do, I would put plants with similar watering needs in the same bed. So, because if you have summer and winter dormant together, well, what do you do? How much water do you get? When do you get it? It's a bit of a problem, but we all face that. And most of the time, it works just well, just fine. Then we have sun. That's the last thing I'm going to talk about. Full sun does not mean full sun everywhere. If you buy a succulent, it'll say full sun. Well, full sun in Alabama is quite different than full sun in Walnut Creek. And I know for a fact that full sun can cause a lot of problems. Probably for every succulent you want, indirect sun or partial shade is your best bet, especially in the afternoon. Now, I'm not familiar with the climate here so much. In Walnut Creek, the afternoon just gets brutally hot. That's when you want to have shade. They can take the sun in the morning, but they need a break from it. Now, here's a plant from my yard. This is called aloe ferox. Those guys can get this big giant plant. And you know what? Full sun is okay for that guy. But I planted an echeveria down there. Full sun is not okay for that guy. So you have to know your plants. And I didn't. We buy plants because they're pretty. But then you sit there and go, well, maybe that's not the right place to put them. Here's another thing people don't think about. I never do. Think about when you go buy any plant, we're talking about succulents. So you go buy a succulent at Bancroft, or maybe at the Botanical Garden, at Posh, at any of these places. Think about it, they're in shade. They're under a shade cloth, they're under a lattice. Now you go put them out in the sun and you'll cook them. They need to be adjusted. You need to give them a period to adjust. And if possible, if you're going to get like aloe, some big plant, put it in the ground in the fall after the heat waves, but so that it can get adjusted gently to the sun in the spring. Because otherwise you can cause some problems. And here's proof from my garden. This is a big cactus. It's very healthy, nice, about this tall. And if you look at it, it's very brown right here. This is called sunburn. I had this plant and for some reason that I don't know, I turned the pot. And so this side of the cactus had not been in full sun before, and it got sunburned, and it will forever be sunburned. It will never turn green there. So it's scarred forever. So you need to be cautious of sun. Propagation. Anna is far more conversant with propagating techniques than me. But many of the plants, fortunately for us, have pups. Here's an euphorbia with pups, and an echeveria with pups, and an agave with pups, and a sempervivum with pups. So you can take the pups, and if you get some roots like that, you can just plant them in a pot or in the ground. Don't water them right away, but you can do that. You can grow them from actually the leaves, and I can actually speak to that. I think you've done it many times. I've never done it. It takes a long time.
3 months.
Yeah, that's a good bit of time. And but a lot of times people give you a cutting, not a thing with root, but like this plant cut right here. They'll give you a cutting. Some people just put them in water and they say it works perfectly. I think that you need to allow, in a general sense, the cuttings to harden off. This is a cactus. Now, this is a big one. It was rotting at the bottom, so I cut it off and I put it out for a few weeks to harden this off, like a scab over it. Because if you put it in the ground right away, it might rot and might get fungus in there. But if it's like this, it has a better chance of surviving. You do that if you do a jade plant or any of the other succulents as well. You can put multiple cuttings in a tray, put them alone, put them in the ground, don't water them right away. Let them harden off, put them where you want them, just let them sit. You can use rooting hormone or not. I've done both ways. with about the same level of success. But most succulents that I've ever tried are pretty easy to propagate. Some are a little more problematic. Now I want to talk at the end about pests. Pests. Mealybugs are probably your worst enemy in succulent. This is an adult mealybug. This is what they look like on an aloe leaf. I've never seen them like that. What I see is this. I see this sort of thing. You get this white strand, a spider web looking stuff. And the mealybugs are down deep into the rosette. Mealybugs are true bugs. They have a sucking mouthparts, suck the juice out of the plant. They produce honeydew. Aphids do the same thing. It draws in ants. They become a real mess. And if there are mealybugs that get in the roots, many really have a problem. But most of the mealybugs we run into are like this. So how do you deal with them? Oh, keep on do that. There you go. Well, there's a lot of ways that you can deal with it. You can use rubbing alcohol, isopropyl alcohol. You can put it on a Q-tip and actually go in and scoop the little guys out. That's one way to do it. You can spray the rubbing alcohol down into the rosette. There are a couple of different types of oil that you can use. Oils and insecticidal soaps do the same thing. They suffocate the insect. The insects breathe through spiracles on their side, so you suffocate them. Now, anything you do, rubbing alcohol, this is more you've heard. Stylet is the one I like personally. Stylet is nothing more than mineral oil with emulsifiers. It's much cheaper if that means anything, but it's very effective. If you use any of these, you need to take a little Q-tip and rub it on one of the leaves off the edge on the side or something, because there are some succulents, I can't tell you which one, that are sensitive and will burn or really have an issue with oil or with soap or with alcohol. So try it. The mealybugs are not going to kill your plant overnight. Then there's a controversial one. Systemic insecticide. Some people really don't like that. But if you have a particularly valuable, whether it's monetarily valuable or emotionally valuable succulent that you really want to keep, and you have mealybugs, you can use it as systemic. It's a drench. You pour it on the ground and it's taken up in the roots by the plant. So anything that feeds on that plant will die. The problem is, if it flowers, the pollen has the insecticide in it, and you will kill pollinator bug. So you don't let the plant flower. You go, well, that's what I want. So here's the problem. So you have a nice, beautiful echeveria with these inflorescence on there, and you have mealybugs. Mealybugs are not going to kill it overnight. Let it flower. When it's done flowering, cut the flowers off, treat it with the systemic, and it's going to be a whole year before it flowers again. Very likely that there will be no residual. That's a controversial issue. Some people think they hang around for months. Some people say weeks. I don't know the answer to that. But sometimes you have, you do it at the Bancroft now. Sometimes you have to do it because you can't deal with it otherwise. Another pest that's very common is aphids. I took this picture 2 days ago in one of my, I don't know how well you see, but if you see all this black stuff here, those are aphids. And aphids like to get on the end. They rarely get down into the body of the succulent. They like to get on the flowers, and they are tended to by ants. Ants. This is an interesting thing. I always love this. I gave a talk on this sort of thing on aphids actually, and the ants stimulate the aphids to produce honeydew, that sticky stuff, and they do it by rubbing them with their antenna. Not only that, the ants produce chemicals in their feet and their mouth that tranquilize the aphids so they don't run away. And it's a way that ants farm the aphids. And by farming the aphids, they then have, they get the honeydew, which they eat and take back to their nest. And they're ferocious animals that drive away the good guy bugs, like the ladybugs and other things. So if you have aphids, you're going to have ants. How do you deal with them? The same way you deal with the mealybug, with the exception, I would never personally use the systemic on that, because aphids are usually where you can see them, you can spray them off with the hose, or you could use the alcohol or the, I've used oil on them. There are fungi, fortunately for us, fungus on succulents is usually in damp climates. Of course, that's what we have right now. Unsightly but seldom faded. This lady, Deborah Lee Baldwin, has gotten lots of information about succulents. She's really a good resource to have. But right now, I don't know, Anna, if there are any of you that are growing succulents now, if you're having trouble with fungal diseases because of the wetness we've had. If your plants are outside, you can't keep them dry. So anyway, but fungus is usually not a problem. Your biggest problem is probably mealybugs. And so I hope that you would take good care of your succulents. I hope you learned a little bit from this, maybe, that you didn't know. And I think if you take good care of them, they're going to take good care of you. So I urge you to grow succulents. And if you get a chance, go to the Bancroft Garden. It's a beautiful place. Every week something's blooming, so it's good. So I will answer questions, or I will try to answer questions if you have them. So that's it. Yes.
You said that are in the winter, they're not. How come they're still blooming?
You know, that's an interesting thing because most of them do not, but some of them do. And this has been a goofy year, I think, because I found that my echeveria, which usually bloom later in the spring into the summer, they're blooming now. Nobody can answer that question for me of why, except that they are, even Brian Kimball was saying, we have a agave in the garden down there. And why is it blooming now? Nobody knows. It shouldn't. I mean, usually, and most of them won't, but some of them do. There's always the exception, I guess.
Have a foxtail on it. It's been blooming since October.
Now, so it will, does it have pups or will it just die off?
It has cup and it will die off once the bloom.
Yeah.
And second one is blooming, but it still has all the little flowers.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, that's really beautiful. It's unfortunate they die because they can be a mess down there. Some of them are big. What do you do with them? You know, yeah, cut them out. Yeah. Yes.
I'm concerned because I haven't seen any ants in mine. The bee bugs. All I see are the roly potions.
Well, roly-polies, you know, they actually are, they're decomposers. They're good for the soil, but they will damage tiny little plants. If you have seedlings, not so much succulents that I know of, but if they're out and they will damage, like if you plant lettuce or, you know, edibles, they're more damaging to that. But in a general sense, they're pretty good. They decompose stuff. They decompose, they chew up old leaves and they decompose it. And so they're a good thing for the garden in general, but not if you have little seedlings. Yes.
Would you recommend any kind of, do they need to be fertilized or they need any food?
Yeah, you know, most of the stuff that I get, they rarely are fertilized. And if they do, you fertilize it with a general fertilizer about half strength. You don't do it in full strength.
Because they sell this cactus juice stuff.
Yeah,
No.
I would have to see what it's made out of, but I would do it half strength. That's what they do with God. Now, I didn't mention some of the protea plants. They're not really succulents, but they're dry plants, the protea, that are very nice. They're from Australia and South Africa. Now, if you fertilize them with a general fertilizer, you likely will kill them because they can't take phosphorus. They grow in habitat in an area with no phosphorus. So, you know, they have mechanisms to make sure they get enough phosphorus from a low phosphorus. Now you give them phosphorus like a drug overdose. So, but most of the succulents, you can use something, sometimes you can use feather meal or cottonseed meal that are high in nitrogen. You throw them out. That's an organic type of fertilizer. You throw it out there. At Bancroft, they use compost. They just throw it out there, or compost tea, where you have compost and you put water in it and you spray it on it. So yeah, they fertilize, but usually
not like you'd fertilize, tomatoes or something, or your flowers. You want to cut it back, and you do it in the spring, and you only maybe do it one time. That's another thing that's hard to do. They look like they need some. They need water, they need fertilization. They probably don't. It's very hard that you don't
So just
overdo
do
it.
it once in the spring and that should be it.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's what I would do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes,
I have a giant aloe that continues to take branches, and it's now taking over a path. Is it going to hurt if I whack off some of those?
no. And you know what? Whack them off, let them harden off, and give them to your friends. And they can put them, once they're hardened off, the end of it scabbed over, if you will. I don't know how big they are, but cut them back to cut the big thing off in their way, then cut them to a reasonable size, let them harden off. And then you can put them in succulent mix or wherever, and it'll take a while, but they'll usually root, and then there you have another one. You could give it away or put it somewhere else in your yard. There you go. Anything else? Yes, sir.
For dividing the, is there a best practice on?
I don't know. I would say you wouldn't wanna, I would say you wanna do it now in the spring, you wanna do things, because that's when things are picking up. Remember the dormancy of these plants, so,
And who's going, regardless of what the summer goes.
yeah, and I would do it now. Anna, do you have any?
When they look good.
Yeah.
If they're dormant, they're not.
Yeah.
Nothing is gonna look good enough.
Yeah. But you're okay with anytime the plant looks good and you need to do it, I think it's fair. Anything else? Thanks so much for your time. Oh, wait, we have some more questions. Yes, ma'am.
My daughter gave me a cactus small, about that big spikes.
Yes.
We've got one thing put on the side. I saw it in her backyard, and it's in my kitchen. I get morning sun over on the house, the afternoon sun. Do I put it out on my deck and let it grow? Do I want it periodically?
If you want to, if it's doing well and you like it where it is, leave it there. But if you want it to get it to grow outside, it'll maybe repot it up. Is it a little tiny pot? Yeah. You can repot it in a bigger pot perhaps and put it outside if you want. It's really what your preference. If you like the look of it in your windowsill, just leave it there. It'll do just fine. Yeah.
I have an Ionium that sends up drawing yellow flowers.
Yes.
Bees and birds love.
Yes.
Why is it doing that?
That's the way it reproduces. That's it. And my experience, a lot of aliens, that big stalk will die. Once it's flowered, it'll be flowered for weeks on end. Eventually it'll peter out, it'll start looking bad and you cut it off. Because next year we got new shoots down low. Yeah.
Yes, I have a giant agave, and then I start up the spike, turns to the flowers. The flowers are a little color. Real good nectar, and I think that nectar is some of the best stuff I've ever tasted.
Oh, really? You're a better man than me trying that. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, must be okay, huh? Well, agaves, are used to make tequila and mezcal, so must be something good in there. Great, thanks so much for your attention.
Thank you.
Joanne, that was fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you
Great.
so much. And the photos were beautiful,
Yeah.
beautiful.
Thank you.
Ansel Adams has nothing. We could make much. Thank you very much. That was so interesting. And as you say, lots of people in the club are interested in succulents. And some of us don't know very much. And so we learned a lot. So thank you so much. So